The laughter started before he even reached the reception hall. People turned their heads as a tall man in a worn gray suit stepped through the grand entrance of the luxury resort where the wedding of the year was taking place. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Fresh white roses covered every wall. The guest list included celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. The wedding had reportedly cost more than $30,000. Yet the man standing near the entrance looked like he didn't belong there at all. His suit was old. The sleeves were slightly faded. His shoes showed signs of years of use. Beside him stood a little girl holding his hand tightly. The whispers spread instantly. "Who invited him? Is he lost? He looks like he came from a thrift store." The man ignored every stare and simply smiled at his daughter. "Ready, sweetheart?" he asked. The little girl nodded. Either of them noticed the bride watching from across the room. The bride, Vanessa Monroe, came from one of the wealthiest families in the city. She had spent months planning every detail of her perfect wedding. Every guest had been carefully selected. Every decoration had been imported. And now this man was ruining the image she had created. Vanessa walked directly toward him, her expensive heels clicking across the marble floor. The room became silent. She stopped in front of him and looked him up and down. "Excuse me," she said coldly. The man smiled politely. "Yes? Who are you?" "My name is Daniel Carter. And what exactly are you doing here?" "I was invited." Vanessa laughed. Actually laughed. Several guests joined her. "You were invited?" "Yes." She looked at his suit again. "By who?" "The groom." The crowd exchanged amused looks. Vanessa folded her arms. "My husband doesn't know people who dress like that." Daniel remained calm. "Well, he knows me." The bride's face hardened. "I spent thousands creating an elegant wedding. The last thing I need is someone looking like they wandered in from a bus station." The crowd gasped. Daniel's daughter squeezed his hand. "Daddy." He gently rubbed her shoulder. "It's okay." But Vanessa wasn't finished. She pointed toward the door. "Leave." The room fell completely silent. Daniel stared at her. "I'm sorry." "You heard me." "Vanessa," one guest whispered nervously. "No," she snapped. "If people want to look like beggars, they can do it somewhere else." Several guests laughed. Daniel looked at his daughter. The little girl was trying not to cry. For a moment, something changed in his eyes. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Disappointment. Deep disappointment. He slowly nodded. "If that's what you want." Vanessa smirked. "It is." Daniel took his daughter's hand and turned toward the exit. The humiliation was complete. The bride felt victorious. The guests resumed chatting. Music started again. Everything seemed normal. Then the front doors opened. And the entire wedding stopped. Every conversation died instantly. A line of black luxury vehicles had arrived outside. One after another. Security personnel entered first. Then came several men in expensive suits. Their expressions were serious. The crowd exchanged confused glances. Vanessa frowned. "What is this?" Nobody answered. Then one final car pulled up. The driver opened the door. A man stepped out. The reaction was immediate. Gasps echoed through the room. Several businessmen nearly dropped their drinks. One woman covered her mouth in shock. Because the man entering wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the richest people in the country. Billionaire investor Richard Kingsley. A man whose companies were worth billions. A man who rarely appeared in public. A man powerful enough to change entire industries with a single phone call. The groom turned pale. "That's Richard Kingsley." Vanessa blinked. "What?" The billionaire walked through the reception hall. Everyone expected him to approach the bride and groom. Instead, he kept walking. Straight toward the exit. Straight toward Daniel. The entire room watched in confusion. Richard Kingsley reached him. Then smiled. A genuine smile. "Daniel." Daniel smiled back. "Richard." What happened next froze every person in the room. The billionaire embraced the supposedly poor single father like an old friend. Not a business acquaintance. Not a casual contact. A close friend. The silence became unbearable. Vanessa's face lost all color. Richard looked down at Daniel's daughter. "And this must be Emily." The little girl nodded shyly. Richard laughed. Your father talks about you constantly. Nobody understood what they were seeing. The billionaire then turned toward the crowd. His smile disappeared. What happened here? Nobody spoke. Vanessa suddenly felt nervous. Richard glanced at Daniel's faded suit. Then at the expressions around the room. His eyes narrowed. Someone explain. The groom swallowed. Vanessa stepped forward. It's just a misunderstanding. Daniel remained silent. Richard looked directly at him. Daniel? For a few seconds, Daniel said nothing. Then he smiled sadly. The bride didn't think my clothes were appropriate. Richard's face hardened instantly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vanessa felt a chill run down her spine. What exactly did she say? Daniel hesitated. Richard looked around. I asked a question. One guest finally spoke. She called him a beggar. The room went silent again. Richard stared at Vanessa. The billionaire's expression became terrifying. Because now he understood. He slowly turned back toward Daniel. Then said words that would destroy the entire evening. You mean the man who built half my investment empire was asked to leave because of his suit? The room exploded with shock. What? No way. Built his empire? Vanessa looked like she had been struck by lightning. Richard nodded. Everything I own today started because this man believed in me 20 years ago. No one could speak. Richard continued. When I was bankrupt, nobody would help me. He pointed at Daniel. Nobody except him. The guests stared. Richard's voice echoed through the ballroom. Daniel lent me money when he barely had any himself. More gasps. He gave me advice. More silence. He introduced me to investors. The shock deepened. And when my first company succeeded, he refused to take credit. Vanessa's knees nearly gave out. The groom looked horrified. Richard smiled at Daniel. He could have become a billionaire many times over. The crowd couldn't believe it. Richard continued. But instead he chose to spend his life raising his daughter and helping people quietly. Someone whispered. Why is he dressed like that? Richard laughed. Because he doesn't care. Then he delivered the sentence nobody expected. Daniel's personal wealth is estimated at over $800 million. The ballroom erupted. Several guests nearly choked. Others looked ready to faint. Vanessa's face became ghost white. 800 million. The man she had called a beggar. The man she had humiliated. The man she had thrown out. Was worth hundreds of millions. Daniel sighed. I never wanted anyone to know. Richard nodded. I know. The billionaire then looked around the room. You see this suit? Everyone stared. Richard smiled. Daniel has worn that suit for years. The crowd listened. He wears it because it belonged to his late wife. A painful silence filled the ballroom. Daniel looked down. His daughter squeezed his hand. Richard's voice softened. He wears it because it reminds him of her. Several guests lowered their eyes. Some felt ashamed. Others couldn't even look at Daniel anymore. Vanessa felt physically sick. The suit she mocked, the suit she ridiculed, was one of the most meaningful possessions in his life. Richard shook his head. Money reveals character. The room remained silent. But moments like this reveal character even faster. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Vanessa finally stepped forward. Her voice trembled. Mr. Carter. I'm sorry. Daniel looked at her. For a moment, she thought he might yell. Instead, he simply smiled. A calm, sad smile. The problem isn't what you said to me. She looked confused. Daniel gently placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. It's what you taught her tonight. The words hit harder than any insult. Vanessa broke down crying. Because she suddenly understood. The little girl had witnessed everything. The laughter. The humiliation. The cruelty. All because of a suit. Daniel looked around the room. I hope everyone here remembers something. Nobody breathed. The value of a person isn't measured by their clothes. Absolute silence. Or their car. More silence. Or their bank account. Even more silence. It's measured by how they treat people who can do nothing for them. The words settled heavily over the crowd. Several guests quietly wiped away tears. Others looked ashamed. Richard smiled proudly. That was exactly why he respected Daniel. Not because of money. Not because of business. Because of character. The billionaire turned toward the groom. You chose a beautiful venue. The groom nodded nervously. But the most valuable thing here tonight wasn't the flowers. Silence. It wasn't the decorations. More silence. It wasn't the jewelry. The crowd listened carefully. It was the opportunity to show kindness. Nobody would forget those words. Daniel then surprised everyone. He walked back toward Vanessa. The bride looked terrified. But Daniel simply extended his hand. I accept your apology. Vanessa stared at him. Tears streamed down her face. Slowly, she shook his hand. The crowd watched. Daniel could have humiliated her. He could have embarrassed her. He could have taken revenge. Instead, he chose grace. And somehow that made everyone feel even worse. Because true class wasn't displayed by wealth. It wasn't displayed by expensive weddings. It wasn't displayed by luxury clothing. It was displayed by forgiveness. As the evening continued, people viewed Daniel differently. Not as a millionaire. Not as an investor. Not as a wealthy businessman. But as a father. A man who had endured humiliation without becoming cruel. A man who protected his daughter while teaching her dignity. And months later, when guests remembered that wedding, almost nobody talked about the flowers. Nobody talked about the food. Nobody talked about the decorations. They talked about the moment a single father in a worn suit walked into a luxury wedding and revealed a lesson worth more than all $30,000 spent on the event. Because the richest person in the room wasn't the billionaire who arrived in a convoy of luxury cars. It was the man who never needed anyone to know how rich he truly was.